My true story from Antonio, Texas. My son spat on my face and called me a burden while in the hospital fighting for my life. You know, there comes a moment in every person's life when you realize that the people you love most in this world see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. For me, that moment came when I was lying in my hospital bed, recovering from pneumonia that nearly killed me, barely able to breathe even with oxygen machines, and my son David looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, you're nothing but a burden now," and then he spat directly in my face. As that warm saliva hit my cheek while I lay there helpless, hooked up to tubes and wires, unable to even lift my arm to wipe it away, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. You see, David had absolutely no idea that this helpless old woman he had been systematically abusing for 2 years was actually a former federal prosecutor who had spent 35 years putting away over 200 criminals just like him. And for months, I had been secretly documenting every single thing he did to me. Before I tell you how I completely destroyed my son's life the same way he was destroying mine, I need you to do something right now. If you've ever been mistreated, abused, or underestimated by someone who had absolutely no idea who they were really dealing with, drop your story in the comments below. And if you believe that abusers should face real consequences, not just apologies or promises to change, but actual prison time and life-destroying justice, smash that subscribe button and type "justice" in the comments right now. This is the story of how the wrong person picked the wrong victim at exactly the right time to learn that sometimes karma doesn't just come full circle. It comes with FBI agents, federal charges, handcuffs, and a prison sentence that will haunt the abuser for the rest of his miserable life. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand why you should never ever underestimate someone just because they're old, sick, or appear vulnerable. My name is Ruth Martinez, and before I tell you about the worst 2 years of my life, I need you to understand exactly who I am and why my son David made the biggest mistake any criminal has ever made. For 35 years, I was one of the most feared and respected federal prosecutors in the entire state of Texas. I didn't handle white-collar crimes or drug cases. I specialized in the cases that made other prosecutors uncomfortable: elder abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault. The cases where predators targeted people they thought were weak, defenseless, and unable to fight back. I put away over 200 criminals during my career. Husbands who beat their wives. Parents who abused their children. Adult children who stole from elderly parents. Caregivers who neglected nursing home patients. Scam artists who targeted seniors. Every type of predator you can imagine who made the mistake of thinking they could prey on vulnerable people in my jurisdiction. I never lost a case. Not one. Not ever. Not a single time in 35 years. When I walked into a courtroom, defense attorneys would literally groan out loud because they knew their client was going to prison. Judges respected me because when Ruth Martinez presented evidence, it was flawless, comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely devastating to whoever was stupid enough to commit crimes in my district. I was known for 3 things: meticulous evidence gathering, unshakable courtroom testimony, and sentences that sent a message to every other potential predator that this was not the place to target vulnerable people. My case preparation was legendary among law enforcement. I would spend months building cases, gathering every piece of evidence, interviewing every witness, documenting every detail until I had constructed an absolutely airtight prosecution that no defense attorney could penetrate. In 2014, when I retired after 35 years of service, the FBI gave me their highest civilian commendation for unparalleled dedication to justice and the protection of society's most vulnerable citizens. The ceremony was attended by judges, FBI agents, police chiefs, and dozens of prosecutors who had worked with me over the decades. My colleagues gave speeches about how I had changed the way elder abuse cases were prosecuted in Texas. Victims' families thanked me for giving them justice when everyone else had given up. The ceremony was beautiful, my career was complete, and I thought my days of fighting criminals were behind me forever. I was wrong. I just didn't know that my final, most important, most personal case would be against my own flesh and blood. After retirement, I had a wonderful life. My husband of 42 years, Miguel, was my best friend, my partner, my rock. We had plans to travel, to spend time with our grandchildren, to enjoy the golden years we had worked so hard to earn. But 5 years ago, Everything in my life changed when Miguel was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. We fought it together for 8 months, but cancer is a cruel enemy that doesn't care about love or plans or dreams. Miguel died in my arms on a Tuesday morning in October, and suddenly I was a 69-year-old widow trying to figure out how to live alone for the first time in my adult life. The grief was overwhelming. This man who had supported my career, who had celebrated every conviction, who had held me when difficult cases broke my heart, was gone. The house felt empty, the silence was deafening, and I struggled to find purpose without him. My son David seemed genuinely concerned about me during those first months of widowhood. He called frequently, visited regularly, helped with household repairs and errands. He suggested I might want to consider moving closer to his family so I wouldn't be so isolated. "Mom, we worry about you being alone in that big house," he would say. "What if something happens? What if you fall or get sick and no one finds you for days?" His concern seemed genuine, loving, and reasonable. I thought my son was being a caring adult child who wanted to make sure his aging mother was safe and supported. I had no idea he was already planning how to take advantage of my vulnerability. But while I was grieving my husband and trying to rebuild my life, David was destroying his own life through gambling addiction. These weren't occasional trips to the casino or friendly poker games with friends. This was a full-blown addiction that consumed every dollar he could get his hands on. David had once been someone I was proud of. He had built a successful construction business from nothing, employing 12 people, earning 6 figures annually. He owned a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a nice suburb, drove a new truck, and took family vacations every year. But gambling addiction is a disease that destroys everything it touches, and it systematically destroys every aspect of David's life. First, he started gambling away the business profits. Then he began taking loans from the business account to cover gambling debts. Then he mortgaged the business equipment to get more gambling money. Within 18 months, David's thriving construction company was bankrupt. The house was next. Second mortgage, third mortgage, home equity loans. All of it gambled away on slot machines, sports betting, and casino games. His wife Kim was working double shifts as a registered nurse, but her salary couldn't cover the mortgage payments on a house that was now underwater with debt. They lost the house. They lost the cars. They lost their savings, their credit, their dignity. David's shame was eating him alive. But instead of getting help for his addiction, he just looked for new sources of money to feed it. That's when he started looking at me differently. Not as his mother who was grieving and needed support, but as a potential source of income that he could manipulate and control. 6 months after Miguel's death, David came to me with what seemed like a reasonable, loving proposition. "Mom, Kim and I have been talking and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved in with us. You shouldn't be alone in that big house, dealing with all the maintenance and expenses. We have plenty of room, the kids would love having grandma closer, and we could take care of each other." He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. Like he was the concerned son offering to care for his aging, grieving mother. "You could sell the house and invest that money for your retirement," he continued. "Move in with us, help with some of the household expenses, and we'll make sure you're never alone or unsafe." Seemed perfect. I would have family around me, I could help my son's family financially during their difficult time, and I would be close to my grandchildren Emma and Tyler, who I adored. I sold my house, the house Miguel and I had shared for 20 years, and moved in with David's family. I used part of the proceeds to help them avoid foreclosure on their home. I thought I was being a loving mother and grandmother, helping my family through a tough period. I had no idea I was walking into a carefully planned trap that would nearly cost me my life, my dignity, and everything I had worked for during my entire career. The federal prosecutor who had spent decades protecting vulnerable people from predators had just become the perfect victim for the most dangerous predator of all. A family member who knew exactly how to exploit trust, love, and family loyalty. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were planning to betray you? Let me know in the comments below, because what I'm about to tell you about the first signs of David's true intentions will shock you. And if you're already invested in Ruth's story, Hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next will make you understand why family members can be the most dangerous abusers of all. First, everything seemed wonderful. I had my own bedroom and bathroom in David and Kim's house. I could come and go as I pleased. I had dinner with the family every night, helped Emma with her homework, and taught Tyler how to play chess. David was grateful for my financial contribution to the household. Kim seemed relieved that the mortgage was current and they weren't facing foreclosure anymore. The children were happy to have Grandma living with them. I felt like I was making a real difference in their lives while also healing from my own grief. For the first time since Miguel's death, I felt useful, needed, part of a family again. But I started noticing small things that seemed odd, though not necessarily threatening. David began helping me with tasks that I was perfectly capable of doing myself. "Mom, let me handle your mail for you. Some of these bills are confusing, and I don't want you to worry about them. Here, let me organize your medications in this pill organizer so you don't forget to take them. Mom, you don't need to drive to the grocery store. Just make me a list and I'll pick up everything you need." Each offer seemed thoughtful and caring. A loving son taking care of his aging mother. But looking back now, I can see that David was systematically testing my boundaries, seeing how much control I would allow him to take over my daily life. Then, 2 years ago, I received a diagnosis that changed everything: early-stage Parkinson's disease. My hands had been shaking occasionally. My handwriting was becoming smaller and more difficult to read, and sometimes I felt stiff in the mornings. My doctor ran tests and delivered the news that no one ever wants to hear. "Ruth, you have Parkinson's disease. It's in the early stages, and with proper medication and physical therapy, we can manage the symptoms effectively for many years. You can still live a full, active life." The diagnosis was scary, but it wasn't a death sentence. Millions of people live with Parkinson's disease and maintain their independence for decades with proper medical care. But David saw my diagnosis differently. Where my doctor saw a manageable condition, David saw opportunity. Where I needed compassion and support, he saw weakness he could exploit. From the moment I told the family about my diagnosis, David's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. "Mom, you really shouldn't be driving anymore. What if your hands shake while you're behind the wheel? You could hurt yourself or someone else. I think we should take your car keys just to be safe. You're not steady on your feet anymore. Maybe you should stay downstairs and avoid the stairs as much as possible. Actually, it would be safer if you just stayed in your room most of the time. Let me handle all your financial paperwork now. Your hands shake too much to write checks properly, and we don't want you to make mistakes with your bank accounts." Each suggestion was presented as concern for my safety and well-being. But I began to realize that David was using my diagnosis as justification to take control of every aspect of my life. Within 6 months of my Parkinson's diagnosis, David had systematically cut me off from the outside world, and he did it so gradually that I almost didn't notice what was happening. Phone calls from old friends and former colleagues were intercepted. When my former law partner called to check on me, David would answer my phone and say, "Mom's not feeling well today. The Parkinson's is really affecting her, and the doctor says she needs complete rest. She's sleeping right now. She's having a bad day and can't really talk." My mail started disappearing. Important letters from my bank, my insurance company, my doctor's office. David claimed he was organizing it for me, but I never saw most of it again. Visitors were turned away. When my former colleague Maria Santos came by to visit, David met her at the door and said, "I'm sorry, but Mom is too sick for visitors today. The Parkinson's has really progressed, and she gets confused easily. Maybe you could call first next time." My car keys vanished one day. When I asked about them, David said, "Mom, remember? We talked about this. You're too sick to drive safely anymore. It's not just about you. We have to think about other people on the road." But I didn't remember agreeing to give up my car keys. I was still capable of driving short distances to familiar places. The Parkinson's was mild, well controlled with medication, and my doctor had never suggested I stop driving. Within 8 months, I went from being an independent woman with an active social life and professional connections to essentially a prisoner in what used to be my son's guest room. But the isolation was just the beginning. Once David had cut me off from the outside world, the psychological abuse began in earnest. He would stand in my doorway and deliver speeches about how much I was costing the family. "Mom, do you understand what you're doing to us? Kim is working herself to death trying to support this family, and half her salary goes to your medical expenses and medications. The kids can't have new clothes or school supplies because all our money goes to taking care of you. We can't go on family vacations anymore because we have to pay for your doctor visits and prescriptions. Sometimes I wonder if it would be better for everyone if you just went to a nursing home. At least then the state would pay for your care instead of us." The verbal attacks were carefully calculated to make me feel guilty, worthless, and completely dependent on his charity for survival. "Why don't you just die and stop being such a burden on this family?" became his favorite phrase. He would say it casually like he was commenting on the weather. "You know, Mom, most people your age with Parkinson's don't live this long. Maybe it's time to think about just letting nature take its course." Every cruel word, every psychological attack, every threat was being recorded by equipment I had hidden throughout the house. David thought he was breaking me down, making me more compliant and easier to control. He had no idea that he was actually building his own federal case, supervised by a prosecutor who had spent decades studying psychological abuse tactics and knew exactly how to document them for court. Once David had me isolated and psychologically beaten down, he moved to the next phase of his plan: stealing my money. My federal pension and Social Security payments combined to about $4,200 per month, a substantial income that represented financial security for my retirement years. But to David, that wasn't my lifeline. It was his opportunity. It started with helping me manage my finances. "Mom, your hands shake too much to write checks properly. Let me handle your bill paying so you don't make mistakes." Then it became direct deposit for convenience. "Mom, it's easier if we just have your checks deposited directly into our joint account, and then I'll make sure all your expenses are covered." But there was no joint account. David was depositing my entire income into his personal account and then giving me an allowance of about $150 per month for personal expenses. When I protested that I needed more money for my medications, my clothes, my personal items, David would explode with rage. "Mom, you're living in our house rent-free. You're eating our food, using our utilities, taking up space that we could be using for other things. This is what it costs to take care of someone with your medical needs. You should be grateful we're not charging you more." I was 74 years old, and my own son was stealing 96% of my income while telling me I should be grateful for his generosity. If you're feeling angry about what David was doing to his own mother, type "thief" in the comments. Because what I'm about to tell you about the medical abuse will make you understand why some people deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The most dangerous and criminal part of David's abuse involved my medical care, and it was also where his wife Kim became a willing accomplice in what could only be described as attempted murder through medical neglect. My Parkinson's medication was expensive, about $800 per month even with Medicare coverage. But David discovered that my pills were also valuable on the street. Parkinson's medications, pain pills, anti-anxiety medications. All of these could be sold for significant money to drug dealers and addicts. So David and Kim started stealing my medications systematically. "Mom, you don't need this many pills," David would say, taking half of my monthly prescription. "You're getting addicted to these medications. We're helping you by reducing your dosage." Kim, despite being a registered nurse with 20 years of experience, would watch me suffer through Parkinson's episodes without my medication and do absolutely nothing to help me. When my hands would shake uncontrollably because I hadn't had my medication, Kim would say, "That's normal for Parkinson's patients. You just need to learn to live with it." When I would be in agony, barely able to move because my medication had been stolen, Kim would say, "Pain is part of the aging process. You need to stop complaining and accept your limitations." But Kim knew exactly what Parkinson's patients went through without their medication. She knew I was suffering unnecessarily. She knew that withholding prescribed medication from an elderly patient was not just medical neglect, it was criminal abuse. I would beg for my medication. Please, my hands are shaking so badly I can't even hold a fork. I need my pills. David's response was always the same. Maybe if you weren't such a burden on this family, we could afford to keep you properly medicated. While David was stealing my medication, he was also escalating his theft of my financial assets in ways that constituted multiple federal crimes. I discovered that he had been forging my signature on documents. My car title had been transferred to his name without my knowledge or consent. My bank account had been changed to make him the primary account holder with the authority to make withdrawals without my signature. Jewelry that had been in my family for generations started disappearing from my room. My grandmother's pearl necklace, my wedding ring set, earrings that Miguel had given me for our anniversary. All gone, sold to pawn shops to feed David's gambling addiction. When I confronted him about the missing jewelry, David said, "Mom, you're getting confused because of the Parkinson's. You probably just misplaced those things. They'll turn up eventually." But I wasn't confused. I was being systematically robbed by my own son. The most shocking discovery came when I found paperwork that David had hidden showing he had attempted to get power of attorney over my finances without my knowledge. He had forged my signature on legal documents that would have given him complete control over my bank accounts, my pension, my Social Security, and any other assets I owned. If those documents had been filed and approved, David would have had the legal authority to sell my possessions, control my income, and make medical decisions for me without any oversight or accountability. I realized that David's plan wasn't just to abuse me temporarily. His plan was to gain complete legal control over my life so he could steal everything I owned and then abandon me to die in a state-run nursing home. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was attempted murder by financial starvation, planned and executed by someone who was supposed to love and protect me. Throughout this nightmare, the part that broke my heart more than anything else was watching what David's abuse was doing to my grandchildren Emma and Tyler. These children, who I loved more than life itself, were being traumatized by witnessing their father's systematic cruelty toward their grandmother. But more than that, they were being threatened and terrorized to ensure their silence. David had made it very clear to Emma and Tyler, "If you tell anyone what happens in this house, if you say anything about how we take care of Grandma, you will never see her again. She'll be gone, and it will be your fault because you couldn't keep your mouths shut." Emma was 14 and Tyler was 12, and they were living in constant fear of their own father. They loved me, they could see that I was being mistreated, but they were terrified that speaking up would somehow make things worse for me. Late at night, after David and Kim had gone to bed, the children would sneak into my room to check on me. "Grandma, are you okay?" Emma would whisper, tears in her eyes. "Dad said you're sick and might die soon, but you don't look like you're dying. You just look sad. Are you eating enough, Grandma?" Tyler would ask, bringing me crackers he had stolen from the kitchen because David had decided I was eating too much and had restricted my food intake. "Grandma, why does Dad hate you so much?" Emma asked one night. "You never did anything bad to us. You helped pay for our house and our food. Why is he so mean to you?" I would hold them and try to comfort them without revealing how dire my situation had become. "This will end soon," I would promise them. "Grandma has a plan. Everything is going to be okay, and you won't have to be scared anymore." Those children were witnessing elder abuse, and they were being psychologically abused themselves through their father's threats and manipulation. But they were also going to be my most powerful witnesses when the time came to testify about what really happened in that house. But while David thought he had me completely under his control, while he believed he was successfully isolating me from help and slowly destroying my will to resist, I was actually conducting the most important investigation of my entire career. You see, David made one critical, devastating mistake. He assumed that because I was old and sick, I was helpless. He forgot that I had spent 3 decades of my life studying people exactly like him, learning how they think, understanding their methods, and developing strategies to build unbreakable cases against them. So I did what I do best. I became a prosecutor again, and David became my target. I purchased small, high-quality recording devices online and hid them throughout the house. In my bedroom, in the kitchen, in the living room. Anywhere David might threaten me or reveal his plans. I bought a tiny camera that looked like a button and sewed it into several of my outfits so I could record video evidence of David's abuse, Kim's medical neglect, and the theft of my medications. I maintained a detailed journal, written in code that only another prosecutor would understand, documenting every incident of abuse, every threat, every theft, every violation of my rights. I photographed my injuries when David grabbed me or pushed me. I photographed my medications before and after David stole them. I photographed my missing jewelry and personal possessions. Most importantly, I had been in secret contact with my former colleague Maria Santos, who was still an active federal prosecutor. Using a phone that I kept hidden in my room, I would call Maria when David and Kim were out of the house and give her coded updates about what was happening to me. Maria, I'm working on a case involving systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, and medical neglect, I would tell her. The perpetrators are family members, and I'll need federal intervention when I have enough evidence to guarantee conviction. Maria knew exactly what I meant. I was building a case, and when I was ready to prosecute, I would need the full power of the federal justice system to ensure that my abusers faced the maximum possible consequences for their crimes. While David thought he was controlling me, I was actually conducting a months-long federal investigation into his criminal activities, gathering evidence that would eventually send him to prison for years. Comment below if you think David had no idea what kind of prosecutor he was messing with, because what I'm about to tell you about the breaking point will prove that even the most careful criminals eventually make mistakes that destroy them completely. Last winter, after 18 months of systematic abuse, medical neglect, and psychological torture, my body finally began to break down under the stress of David's treatment. I developed pneumonia, a serious, potentially fatal condition for anyone my age, but especially dangerous for someone who had been weakened by medication theft, food restrictions, and deliberate medical neglect. First, I thought I just had a cold. But within days, I was struggling to breathe, running a high fever, and barely conscious. My condition deteriorated so rapidly that even Kim, despite all her medical training and complete lack of compassion for me, finally had to admit that I needed emergency medical care. "David, we have to call an ambulance," I heard her telling him from my bed where I lay gasping for air. "If she dies in our house, there are going to be questions about her care. We can't explain why she's this sick without proper medical attention." So Kim called 911, not because she cared about my life, but because she was afraid of facing questions about why they had allowed my condition to become life-threatening. The paramedics who responded were shocked by my condition. "How long has she been this sick?" they asked Kim. "This is severe pneumonia that should have been treated days ago." Kim lied smoothly. "She just got sick yesterday. It came on very suddenly." But I was conscious enough to hear her lie, and I was still wearing my hidden recording device that captured every word. I was rushed to the hospital and admitted to the intensive care unit. The doctors told David and Kim that I was critically ill and might not survive. Instead of showing concern or worry about his mother's life, David was furious about the inconvenience my near-death experience was causing him. For 2 weeks, I was hospitalized in the ICU, hooked up to oxygen machines, receiving round-the-clock medical care to save my life. And every single day, David visited the hospital not to comfort me or show concern, but to verbally abuse me about the cost and inconvenience of my illness. "Mom, do you understand how much this is costing us?" he would scream at me while I lay struggling to breathe. "The insurance doesn't cover everything, and Kim is missing work to be here. You're destroying our finances. Why can't you just get better faster? The kids are asking questions about why you're not home, and I don't know what to tell them. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you just stopped fighting this. You're 74 years old, Mom. How much longer do you really want to live anyway? And at what cost to the rest of us?" The nursing staff was horrified by David's behavior. They had never seen a family member verbally abuse a critically ill patient, especially their own mother. "Sir, your mother is fighting for her life," one nurse told David. "She needs support and encouragement, not stress and criticism." David's response was, You don't understand what we've been through taking care of her. She's been nothing but a burden for years, and now this hospital stay is going to bankrupt us." The nurses began filing reports with the hospital administration about David's inappropriate behavior. Social workers were called to evaluate the family dynamics. But David didn't care who heard him because in his mind, I was already dead. I just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Every word of his hospital abuse was being recorded by the device I had hidden in my hospital gown. Every threat, every complaint about the cost of keeping me alive, every expression of resentment about my survival was documented as evidence. Then came the moment that would seal David's fate forever and give me everything I needed to destroy him completely in federal court. I was barely conscious, still on oxygen support, when I managed to whisper to David, "Water, please, just a sip of water." It was a reasonable request from a dying woman. Any normal person, any decent human being, would have immediately called a nurse or helped me get some water. It was the most basic act of compassion anyone could show to a critically ill family member. But David's response revealed the true depths of his hatred and contempt for me. His face contorted with pure, undiluted rage. He leaned down close to my face so the nurses couldn't hear him and said, "You're nothing but a burden now, Mom. Nothing but a worthless burden who's costing us everything we have." And then, looking directly into my eyes while I lay helpless in that hospital bed, barely able to breathe, he gathered saliva in his mouth and spat directly in my face. That warm spit hitting my cheek while I lay there unable to defend myself, unable to even wipe it away, was the most degrading, humiliating moment of my entire life. But it was also David's final mistake. You see, spitting on someone is assault under Texas law. But spitting on a federal officer, even a retired federal prosecutor, is assault on a federal officer, which carries enhanced penalties under federal statute. And that moment of ultimate cruelty was being recorded in high-definition video by the device hidden in my hospital gown. As I wiped that spit from my face with a shaking hand, I realized that I had finally gathered enough evidence to destroy David completely. Months of recordings, photographs, financial documents, medical records showing systematic abuse, witness testimony from hospital staff, and now video evidence of him committing felony assault against a federal officer while she lay critically ill. I made a decision that night that changed everything. Tomorrow I was going to stop being the victim and become the prosecutor again. David had just committed his final crime against the worst possible target, a federal prosecutor who had never lost a case and was about to make him the 201st criminal she sent to prison. But first I had to survive the night. And I had to make sure David had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. Drop a comment if you think David sealed his own fate when he spat in Ruth's face, because what happened next proves that federal prosecutors never really retire. They just get more patient and more dangerous. The next morning, while David was at home probably congratulating himself on successfully intimidating me into final submission, I made a phone call that would completely destroy his life and save mine. From my hospital bed, using a phone the nurses had brought me, I called my former colleague Maria Santos, who was still an active federal prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases. "Maria," I said, my voice still weak from pneumonia but filled with prosecutorial determination, "I need the Elder Abuse Task Force activated immediately. I have a case for you." "Ruth, my God, are you okay? You sound terrible. Where are you calling from?" "I'm in the ICU at Methodist Hospital. I've been systematically abused by my son David for 2 years. Financial exploitation, medical neglect, psychological abuse, and as of yesterday, felony assault on a federal officer. I have recordings, photographs, financial evidence, medical documentation, and video proof of everything." There was complete silence on the other end of the line as Maria processed what I was telling her. Then, "Ruth, are you saying that your own son has been abusing you?" "I'm saying that my son has been committing multiple federal crimes against a former federal prosecutor who has been building an airtight case against him for months. I have enough evidence to send him to federal prison for a decade. And I'm ready to prosecute. What do you need from me?" Maria asked, her voice shifting into the professional tone I remembered from our years working together. I need FBI agents from the Elder Abuse Task Force here within 24 hours to review my evidence and obtain search warrants. I need David arrested before he realizes what's happening and tries to destroy evidence or flee. And I need a federal grand jury to hear this case within the week. Consider it done, Maria said. Ruth, I'm so sorry this happened to you. But I'm also impressed as hell that you managed to build a federal case while being victimized. Only you would think to do that. Maria, I said, feeling stronger than I had in months. I've been a prosecutor for longer than I've been a victim. And prosecutors never really retire. We just get more patient. Within 6 hours, FBI agents from the Elder Abuse Task Force were at the hospital reviewing my evidence. Within 12 hours, they had obtained search warrants for David's house, his bank records, his phone records, and his employment records. Within 24 hours, they were walking into my hospital room with badges, handcuffs, and the authority to arrest anyone who had committed federal crimes against me. I will never forget the look on David's face when 2 FBI agents walked into my hospital room the next afternoon. He had come for his daily session of verbal abuse, probably planning to threaten me about the cost of my medical care and maybe remind me what a burden I was to his family. Instead, he found Special Agent Rodriguez and Special Agent Chen standing beside my hospital bed, wearing suits, showing badges, and looking very serious. Mr. David Martinez? Agent Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the authority that comes with federal law enforcement credentials. Yes, that's me, David said, confusion and fear creeping into his voice. Is there some kind of problem? Did something happen? Sir, you're under federal investigation for elder abuse, financial exploitation, medical neglect, and assault on a federal officer. We need you to come with us for questioning. David's confident expression vanished completely. The color drained from his face, then returned as a deep red flush of panic and rage. He looked from the agents to me and back again, struggling to process what he was hearing. There must be some mistake, he stammered. I've been taking care of her. She's just a sick old woman with Parkinson's disease. She gets confused sometimes. Whatever she told you, it's not reliable because of her condition. Agent Chen looked at me, then back at David. Sir, this sick old woman is former federal prosecutor Ruth Martinez, who spent 35 years prosecuting criminals exactly like you. She's built an airtight case against you with evidence that would impress a federal judge. You have the right to remain silent. As Agent Rodriguez began reading David the Miranda warning, I watched my son's face go through every emotion a criminal experiences when they realize their life as they know it is over. Confusion, denial, anger, fear, desperation, and finally, the dawning realization that he had been caught completely. Mom, David said, his voice breaking as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. How could you do this to me? I'm your son. I'm family. David, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. You stopped being my son the moment you chose to become my abuser. I didn't prosecute my child. I prosecuted a criminal who happened to share my DNA. Over the next week, while I recovered in the hospital, FBI agents and federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence I had been gathering for months. What they found exceeded even my own expectations for thoroughness and legal precision. Hours and hours of audio recordings of David's threats, verbal abuse, and detailed confessions of financial theft. Video footage of him stealing my medications, forging my signature on documents, and denying me food and medical care. Financial records showing systematic theft of my pension and Social Security payments totaling over $78,000. Bank records proving that David had been depositing my income into his personal accounts while giving me minimal allowances. Medical documentation from multiple sources proving that Kim had knowledge of my condition but failed to provide proper care, violating her oath as a registered nurse and her duty as a mandated reporter of elder abuse. Testimony from hospital staff about David's verbal abuse during my illness and his complete lack of concern for my survival. Video evidence of the spitting incident, showing David committing felony assault on a federal officer while she lay critically ill. Even David's own children provided devastating testimony about the threats he had made against them and the fear they lived with every day, watching their father abuse their grandmother. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case told Maria that this was the most comprehensively documented elder abuse case she had ever seen. "It's like Ruth taught a masterclass in evidence gathering while she was being victimized," she said. David's court-appointed attorney took one look at the evidence and immediately began plea negotiations. There was no defense against federal charges backed by prosecutorial precision and a victim who understood exactly how to build an unwinnable case. 6 months later, I walked into federal court for the first time in years. Not as a prosecutor, but as the star witness against my own son in what had become the most talked about elder abuse case in Texas history. I had fully recovered from pneumonia. My Parkinson's was being properly managed with medication David could no longer steal, and I was stronger than I had been in years. But more importantly, I was back in my element, a courtroom where justice was about to be served. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant thought he was systematically abusing a helpless old woman. In reality, he was committing federal crimes against one of the most experienced prosecutors in the history of this court system, and she documented everything." My testimony lasted 2 full days. Calm, professional, methodical, and supported by evidence that left the defense with no possible response. I walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every recording, every photograph, every financial document. "Mr. Martinez believed that my age and illness made me vulnerable," I testified. He was wrong. My experience as a federal prosecutor made me the worst possible choice for a victim, because I knew exactly what evidence to gather and how to present it to ensure his conviction. David's defense attorney tried everything. Mental incompetence due to Parkinson's. False evidence motivated by spite. Entrapment of her own son. But my evidence was flawless, and my testimony was unshakable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all federal charges. At sentencing, the federal judge said, "Mr. Martinez, you chose to abuse someone who spent her entire career protecting people like herself from people like you. The irony is not lost on this court. You committed federal crimes against a federal prosecutor, documenting your own conviction with every cruel act." David received 12 years in federal prison, $125,000 in restitution, 5 years supervised probation upon release, and a permanent restraining order. Kim received 3 years federal prison and permanent loss of her nursing license. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentence. It was watching David finally understand that he had never been in control. From the very beginning, I had been building his case while he thought he was destroying my life. Today, at 76, I'm stronger than ever. I teach law enforcement about elder abuse evidence gathering. I mentor victims through the court process. My grandchildren live safely with my sister and visit me regularly. David thought my age and illness made me vulnerable. He was wrong. My experience made me dangerous. And now he has 12 years in federal prison to think about the difference. If this story has inspired you to never underestimate anyone based on age or appearance, subscribe right now and share this with someone who needs to know that justice is possible. Remember, you're never too old, too sick, or too powerless to fight back when you know who you really are.